Chris, and good afternoon, good morning to our participants who are listening today. As advertised, I wanted to spend some time talking about what I call the invisible part of the game. Whether you're a coach, a player, an educator, we all know that performance many times, or the performance struggles, have nothing to do with the X and O's of playing the game. And I know as coaches, as teachers, it's much easier to teach what we can see. The challenge becomes, why did some athletes, and we'll use baseball, softball as an example, how come some people see the changeup or the curveball or the spin or the trajectory of a ball better than others? And it always fascinated me that it was a combination of a few things. Yes, you need good vision. And I think sometimes when people talk about vision, they think of prescription eyesight. You can have 20/20 vision with the eye doctor, but you're not going to be able to at times see the field or see different pitches. So the premise behind the book that I wrote was this concept called visual psychology. And when I talk about that, sometimes people kind of get confused. Well, is it the mental game or is it the visual game? And I'm here to share, and I pray that the coaches that are listening, you need to integrate them. Stop looking at the visual part of hitting or pitching different from the mental part of the game. Because if you think about it, the eyes, the human eyes are part of the brain. And if the eyes are part of the brain, they're linked to the brain. The first set of information that gets to the brain are through the visual system. So if that's the case, this whole concept of visual psychology that I talk about in the book, let's figure out that maybe how we pay attention and what we pay attention to affects our mindset. And I'm going to repeat that because that's really, quite frankly, the premise of my talk today and the premise behind most of the things that I do with major league teams and colleges and Olympic teams. How we pay attention, what we pay attention to, and what we're focusing on not only affects our visual system, but it affects our mood and mindset. And I'll give you an example. When I was a young coach, focus on the ball, concentrate harder, see the ball out of the pitcher's hand. I now know that information that I shared years ago was probably not the best information for hitters or just any activity that had a ball involved in it. Because what we're learning is that the less we look, the more that we see. And again, I'm going to repeat that again. I know that's probably the first two chapters in the book, this concept of open focus. Think about sunsets, mountains, and oceans. Those of you that have been on a beach, you don't really need to tell the eyes what to be doing or looking at as the sunset, the waves, the sand. You've got all of this good information that's there. With athletes in particular, as stress loads go up, the more anxious they get, they have a tendency to do what? They're going to really find the ball. They're going to really lock in on the ball. I work with players and actually students who have reading issues, right? I teach speed reading with this open focus. And people that read really quick and have good reading comprehension, they're looking at the whole sentence. They're taking the space in between words and what's called chunking them. They're seeing the big picture. So looking at, again, back to the beach analogy, right? When your eyes are in this constant state of naturally sweeping and scanning, and you're not really paying attention hard, you're seeing so much more by looking less. Now, how does this pertain to you being a coach, an educator, or a player? The better players see the field differently than others. By that, I mean, let's use a quarterback for an example, okay? Why is Tom Brady, whether you're a Patriot or his new team, the Buccaneers fan, why does he see the defensive backs and the secondary better than others? He has better awareness, right? His peripheral vision, people talk about that all the time, but it's more than just simply peripheral vision. He's not locked into any particular piece on that football field, right? There's this constant looking at everything and paying attention to all that's important at the time. And I'll say that again, the better athletes know when it's really a significant time to pay attention to, let's say, the ball. And particularly in softball and baseball, I'm here to tell you that it's not the ball, right? If you see my hand as the ball, how the better hitters see the changeup or the slider or the sinker, they spend more time looking at the space in front of the ball. One of the chapters in my book is called Learning How to Be a Space Cadet. Usually when you call an athlete a space cadet, it's not a great, it's not a compliment. I'm here to tell you that you want to get your athletes to understand and be in space more than anything else, because this space that exists, right? We're all looking at a screen right now, right? And the space between my eyes and my screen, right? This area here that the brain and the visual system processes is space, right? There's calculations that are involved. Your brain is saying, you know what? I'm about a foot away from the screen at this point based on the space that I'm now really focusing on. So I'm staring at my screen right now really hard. I'm really looking for that fastball, or the tennis players that we work with. I'm really trying to struggle and find the ball instead of letting go for a second. And I see the screen, but I'm more concerned as to the space that sits in between, let's use the ball as an example, and myself. So this whole concept of space, as crazy and weird as it sounds, you've got to get your players to understand that this space that surrounds everything, they're playing shortstop. The space between shortstop and home plate is great information. The brain processes information better, right, when they spend more time looking and being aware of the space in between. And that's so totally different from what most hitting coaches or even pitching coaches stare at the glove, right? Throw strikes and really stare at the glove. That's probably the worst advice that you can give a young pitcher who's struggling. Or if you got somebody that you're working with that can't hit a curveball or a changeup, or their pitch selection is so bad. It's a big thing now in Major League Baseball. It's all about pitch selection and controlling the strike zone. Well, you're not going to control the strike zone if your constant tools and teaching cues are always premised on focus harder on the ball, right? That one-dimensional way of tracking a moving object is not what the best eyes in the game do. And so I think that's important, right? When you start talking about, and again, it gets back to visual psychology, right? The reason why I named the book Beyond the Ball is because of this concept called space, right? That if you're going to really, and you hear it all the time, slow the game down, stay in the present. I was so sick and tired, quite frankly, of listening to all of the traditional mental skills training that's out there. Very important, right? But I was so tired of, it's all about the process, right? It's all about staying in the present. Well, how the heck do you do that? As a coach, as a player, right? You learn how to stay in the moment. You learn how to avoid this outcome way of thinking by getting the players to understand this concept of space, this air, this nothingness. Because if you think about it, if you ask your players to really focus on the space when they're right in the middle of an at-bat or whatnot, you're driving them right back into the present. And as we know, when their thought process is in the present, and in this example, I just want to be involved and really see the space between the pitcher and home plate. I call this the runway. The better hitters in baseball and softball at the highest level control the runway. They control that distance between home plate and the pitcher's mound because they're constantly searching and looking and calculating the space that's going on. So to me, when you start talking about, and this gets back to as a coach, those of you that are coaches, you might want to ask your players, what exactly are you looking at from the minute that the pitcher in softball, whether it's the rocker step or in baseball, the minute the pitcher breaks his hands, where you're staring. And most of the hitters that I talk to initially, they're staring at the pitcher, they're staring at the glove, right? They're over focusing. And as we mentioned before, the harder you stare, the less you get a chance to see the ball dynamically move. And I think that's the area that we all struggle with, right? We see a bad swing. What's the first thing that the hitting coaches do when you see a bad swing? You know what? Stay back. Well, you can't stay back if the visual information that you're processing is incorrect. Well, you know what? You have a long swing. Well, you have a long swing because the information that you saw wasn't good information. So most of the hitting slumps that you see and I see are pretty much based on just bad visual information, right? The camera, the TV just got bad information. And because of that, the body reacted to something that either didn't exist, a changeup, or you didn't calculate the speed of the ball very well. So using this as an example, and I get back to this concept of open focus. In the day of Googling, if you get nothing out of this presentation, right, go and Google open focus, right? It changed my world and how I taught maybe 10, 12 years ago. Dr. Les Femi, Princeton University, was the first one that blew my mind when he started talking about, hey, when you look at nothing, you see everything. And I knew I was on to something that in 2007, Manny Ramirez with the Red Sox at the time, a team I was doing consulting for, I asked Manny, walk me through your visual search strategy. What are you looking at, right? How is it that you've got one of the highest batting averages for right-handed hitters, slugging percentage is great, you don't strike out, blah, blah, blah. And he shared with me and said, Tony, kind of when I look at nothing, I see everything. And it dawned on me that what he was talking about what was a clinical definition of this concept of open focus, where Manny would simply be staring at the space. And as silly as that is, it's something that you can teach, okay? And again, I'm using the term again. When I look at nothing, I see everything. That's no different than the analogy that I gave you when you're sitting on a beach, right? You're not looking at anything. Your eyes are just processing information over and over again. You're seeing so much more by not this over fixation on a target. And connecting the visual with the mental, when the eyes are providing this easy look, this easy image, the brain settles down, right? You talk about alpha waves, right? The clinical psychologists talk about the zone and staying nice and quiet. Well, I'm here to tell you that you can quiet the brain and quiet that young hitter's chatter that goes on by talking to him or her as to what they're and how they're paying attention. Because the less they pay attention to the object, typically in baseball and softball, it's the ball. Tennis players overfixate on a racket. Hockey players get so enamored with staring at the blade of the stick as a shot's coming in, where the better goaltenders, right, are calculating when that puck is coming by the space in between the blade. And this gets back to learning how to have better anticipation skills. Here's the ball again. Better hitters cheat, as I say, not NCAA cheating, but as the ball comes out, they're hunting the space in between that ball, and they do it so well. So when the ball comes out, they're staying in front of the ball. It's a concept called anticipatory saccadic movements, right? It's I see ball, I get space, okay? Because if they're constantly hunting in front of the ball, they're going to be in a much better position to do what? They're going to see more of where the ball is going and less of where the ball is going in. And that's what your good hitters are doing. That's what your good defenders are doing, okay? They're staying slightly in front of the moving object. They're still seeing the ball, right? But they're looking at this area here. So when the ball does start moving, or the puck starts moving, or the racket starts moving, right? They have better information because they're staying in this area now because the ball is in a constant state of getting closer. So I think everyone who is on this call certainly knows about the mental part of the game. And I'm not dismissing that at all, right? The whole impetus behind my book was to say, okay, great. We could talk about relaxation. We could talk about concentration. We can talk about focus levels. But what if we could teach players how to visually relax? Knowing that at some point, if you're concentrating too hard, you're not going to be able to see where the ball is going as compared to where it's been. And when we start talking to athletes about focusing harder, maybe we should teach them about focusing less, or this whole concept of open focus, which really gets them to be less judgmental, right? Open focus is about, I'm not going to pay attention to anything. And what's really important, my brain will tell me to focus on that at some point, which gets back to, again, the baseball and softball coaches that are here. At your level, through college, pitchers are giving away everything that they're throwing. One of my jobs with Team USA as they get ready to go and hopefully win a gold medal, right? I was in Europe most of last year scouting pitchers, right? These pre-pitch visual cues, things that every pitcher does, even at the big league level, that if hitters were able to stay in this open focus would see so much more. At the college level, at the high school level, and at the travel ball level, if you get your hitters to realize, you know what, instead of focusing on the hip or the below the cap or whatnot, and I stayed in this open focus, right? And I just let my eyes kind of sweep and scan back and forth, I'm going to know what's being thrown, because at the amateur and even lower levels of professional baseball, pitchers are telling you what's throwing. The problem is none of the hitters are doing that half the time, because they have no visual game plan. Their visual search strategy, as I talk about in the book, is they're just staring at the hip. Or a well-intended coach said, stare at the bill of the cap or stare at the chest, compared to, as the pitcher starts moving, I'm going to look at nothing. I'm going to see the center fielder. I'm going to see the shortstop and the second baseman possibly give up where the pitch might be thrown. And then when the ball comes out, I'm going to practice this concept of here's ball and here's where I'm going to be looking. I'm going to be, what I call it, I'm going to steer this ball into the strike zone. Those are the conversations that, quite frankly, once they're out of 10U or 12U, are really going to help them. So, I mean, so the next time that you're seeing your athletes struggle with changeups, swing and strikes, throw strikes, you can do what the mainstream coaches and teachers do, right? And continue to stay in the physical world, but just ask simply one question, even if you don't want to get immersed in it. Tell me what you're paying attention to. Tell me how you're paying attention to. Tell me why you're paying attention to X at a certain point, and get comfortable, because as a good teacher, good teachers can explain things based upon the audience level that you're talking to. And if you want to talk about anticipatory saccadic movement and open focus and non-judgmental seeing, save that for the cocktail hour, or save that when you're trying to impress other coaches. But if you're talking to a 12 or 13, 14-year-old or a college athlete, try using this. How about looking at nothing today, Billy? How about let's talk about space. Or the next time you see a ball being thrown at you, why don't you look at it like you're playing defense? Because if you think about it, in baseball and softball, we don't get all caught up and we don't get stressed out when we're having a catch with our friend. And think about catchers. Catchers spend all their time on the receiving end of those balls that have to be hit. What do you think catchers do? Catchers see the ball coming out, or coming out if it's softball, right? They're not locked into one particular thing. And when the ball comes out, they cheat. They get in front of the ball, so they have to get their glove to where the ball is going. Your catchers should be the best hitters because they're practicing open focus all the time. The problem is, once we put them in the batter's box with a bat in their hand, their visual search system goes differently. Or just think about you having a catch. There's no over staring on the ball. You know that you're going to have to go catch the ball. So you're constantly staying in front of the ball into this space that's going to allow you to have first step quickness, which gets back to, if you want to really improve your outfield or infielder's first step quickness, stop with the cones, stop with the agility ladders, stop with this mechanical stuff, right? Get them to understand that as the ball's coming out and they're watching the play from shortstop or center field, when the ball gets about 2 feet in front of home plate, here's home plate, their eyes should sit in front of home plate. So now when the ball gets hit, they don't get stuck on the barrel of the bat, right? It's called the boomerang effect. They've overstared at home plate. That well-intended fielder is staring at the ball. Now the ball comes out, and guess what? They're 1/100th of a second late readjusting to see where the ball is, and that line drive or ball that they could have caught is gone. So this concept of be concerned about space, staying in front of the ball, right? Practicing this open focus. When I look at nothing, I'll see everything. It'll certainly help when you're on defense also. And I know as coaches, you know, the mental part of the game has really been a big piece of this, right? And I spend a lot of time teaching traditional sports psychology. I like it. I think it's great. But I got bored. I realized that, you know what, as athletes, as people, we live and train and play in the visual world. And at some point, if some of you are going to be better teachers, better coaches, right, you've got to acknowledge that this game is played visually, right? Stop with all the mental gymnastics and all the concepts that sometimes with the best of intention, we throw too much at these kids. And I'm talking kids under 25, right? Well, we're gonna talk about the mental part of the game, and you've got more stuff that's going on the back of the brain. How about if we spend more time in the front of the brain where the visual system is, right? Might that be more easier to digest? And once the game starts, unless you've got a blind player batting cleanup for you, with no pun intended, right? They're going to have to make really good visual decisions, okay? And I think that's where it really comes into play, right? And you talk about, and one of the questions that got popped up, pregame, postgame. I know with teams that I work with, we go out in center field, and when everybody else is on the bonet and hitting off the tee and doing X, Y, and Z, we're just simply out there looking at nothing and seeing everything. We're sweeping and scanning the landscape. We're looking at the trees, the billboards and whatnot, just getting the eyes away from this fixation. Because if you think about it as athletes, especially with this element, right, the phone, your athletes are spending all this time, I call it slammed, crammed, and jammed. They are slammed, crammed, and jammed by the time they get to you to play. Well, we need to stretch them out. No different than dynamic stretching that the trainers talk about. I want to make sure that before the game starts, guess what? We're going to spend time just simply looking out, okay? Looking far, far away. Some of the stuff in the book talks about some of the Shrek exercises, right? Based on the movie Shrek, far, far away. So to me, pregame is even something where they can start getting this concept of open focusing, or just simply being aware of it. If you think about it, you're going to blow your players' minds a little bit when you say, hey, the next time I throw a ball, don't look at it. And they're going to say, Coach, what the duck are you talking about? Okay. I want you to see the ball, but I want you to spend more time looking at this space that's in front of the ball. All right, I'm going to try it. And I'll tell you right now, the first time that they don't swing at a curveball or change up in the dirt, they're going to love you, okay? And you haven't filled them with all the mechanical nonsense of how to hit a change up or how not to swing at a slider or whatnot. You can continue, whether it's hitting vault or anything else that's going on, okay, you can continue to talk mechanics with those players, but I'm here to tell you the reason why they're swinging or they can't put a ball in play. You look at the College World Series in softball and even baseball. The teams that are going to win are going to reduce team strikeouts. So if you're a travel coach or a high school coach, you reduce team strikeouts, you're going to win. Well, how are you going to do that, right? You get your hitters to be able to process information more effectively, right? That they're starting to spin, or they're starting to see the drop of a change 1,000 of a second sooner. They're going to have better swings. That has nothing to do with the mechanics of their swing. So I think that's important to be able to do that. How can I implement the visual aspect of the game in the dugout? Here's an interesting one. Okay, because the more that you're talking, in the less the players are going to be able to watch. Okay. And this gets back to, right, if you're really going to preach the visual part of the game, define the topic. Hey, you know what? Because so many players, when you talk about visual, they think vision. They think about vision training. They think about this nonsense with virtual reality games. I spent 2 chapters in this book talking about virtual reality. So what? Now we're going to put players in goggles, right? Let them play more video games and get them prepared for the actual game itself. There is no direct correlation between a player getting better on those VR games and actual game performance and the research is clear on that. Okay, it's anecdotal when some of these VR people talk about, well, we've improved batting average by 50 or 60%. First of all, time is everything as a student athlete. They don't have time to be going back into the computer vision, even vision training, right? You're not going to get the human eyes stronger, okay, right? The eye muscles, the 8 pairs of ocular muscles that move our movement patterns for eyes, they're really strong. So you're not getting them stronger. right? We've got to get athletes to just simply use them more effectively, right? And this is all free information. If you go to frozenropes.com, there's all these visual drills that are out there that can really teach about open focus, right? And getting people to understand that. And it's kind of interesting. I spend more time now with pitchers, right? Who have control problems, right? Pitchers who have control problems. How would this concept possibly help pitchers who have target acquisition that they need to, if they're never going to get out of A ball or get to the big leagues if they don't throw more strikes? And think about how many times we as coaches have seen that young player struggle, or the player in AAA, their stuff is just as good as the guys in the big leagues, but they don't throw strikes. And the typical advice from the well-intended pitching coach is what? Stare at the glove, hit the target, okay? If that works and you've got great control, terrific. But if you've got someone who continues to struggle with command as it relates to pitchers, you better introduce them to this runway, this spatial area between home plate and the pitcher's mound, and to get them to realize that, you know what, I'm going to keep that out. I'm not even going to be concerned with the glove or the catcher, because if you think about it, pitching is all about feeling. Don't tell your young pitchers this, but by the time they get to a release point, they should be able to close their eyes. Repeating a delivery is not about over focusing on a glove, right? It's a question of feeling where their hand needs to be in time and space. And the fact that you've got the brain now spending more time looking at space and not this hard object, all the research says that when you ask the brain to spend more time concentrating on space, not objects, there's those alpha waves. All of a sudden, you're starting to calm down the brain because space now becomes the primary task. And I know the first time that people hear this, it's like, all right, Tony wants us to just stare into space. I want you to be aware of the space of whether it's the glove or for the pitchers. Let your fielders and defenders understand that the space that exists, depending upon how far they are, is really important. And when they're bored or between pitches, just spend a little time looking at, right, and having your eyes sit in this space, right? That in and of itself is going to calm the brain down, which will allow you to see the ball come out a little better. This is this integration of visual psychology that unfortunately is still not being mainstreamed, right? You have the vision training people with these silly drills and these computer games thinking that you're going to get kids to go and hit better. How about the video occlusion? Now you got these video games where ball gets thrown and they blacken out the space. Have some of you seen that? It's great. So now our players are getting really good playing this computer game, but what those games are not factoring in is space, okay? Space has all these neuronal properties, neurons. Neurons are everywhere in the world. And when you start taking away space in these vision games, you're not really, you're fooling the body and you're fooling the brain, because at some point the brain wants to hunt for space. That's how we're wired to read. That's how we're wired to hit. So the best way to start this with your athletes, and it's not easy. If it was easy, everybody would never swing at balls in the dirt anymore. And the change up or the bad ones, we would simply never swing it anymore. But once you start teaching them about the magic of space and the magic of the fact that this, when I look at nothing, I see everything, and I'm going to pay attention a little less to the primary object, whether it's the ball or the catcher's glove, you're going to start, you'll see results because it's less talking about, right? They're going to start realizing that, you know what? This is not really something that needs to be done. This concept is exactly the same with shooting. Yep, there's no doubt, right? In the book, I spent more time talking to shooters, okay, and hunters. Open focus is, you know what? I'm sitting getting ready to go hunting. If I'm staring at one particular bush and I get a duck or whatever else you're hunting coming out left or right, I'm in trouble. Or even when you're doing clay bird shooting, right? As that clay bird comes up, get ready to shoot, you can't shoot right at the target. You got to anticipate, assess the space where the ball is going and shoot in that direction. So yeah, this isn't something that I made up in a laboratory in my house. These are what are the visual search strategies of the best, okay? Having nothing to do with baseball or softball. You talk about how goaltenders, why is a goaltender, why are they able to move left or right sooner than someone else, right? Because they're taking in more information, because this open focus concept of not being staring at one particular object, they're either doing that naturally or they've learned how to do that. People have asked me all the time, Manny Ramirez is probably one of my more famous clients. Tony, did you teach Manny how to do that? No way. That guy was wired like that out of the crib. Manny learned at an early age, and you know, the classic, well, Manny being Manny, some of you who are old enough to know when Manny Ramirez plays, he was an airhead. He was a space cadet. He was a space cadet, right? Manny spent more time on and off the field in space, but you know what? When it came to playing, and when it came for him to being able to estimate time to collision, and that's really what hitting is about. That's what shooting is about. That's what your outfielders need to do. They need to learn how to estimate time to collision, right? Or in outfield play, we talk about run to the spot where you think it's going to drop, right? That's a classic outfield teaching term. Run to the spot where you think it's going to drop. Outfielders play, they're playing, they're calculating very quickly information, but that ball that's up in the air, right? The fact that they have either learned or from a very early age, they're taking in space and they're assessing the space, they're getting really good at it. And unfortunately, in this generation that you and I are coaching right now, there's not a lot of space. Kids aren't outside a lot, right? The natural landscape that allows them to be able to predict ball flight, they're actually in it even less now. So as educators, as coaches, as hitting coaches, we need to get them back into where the brain and the visual system want to be. We want to be outside. The reason why we love being outside and why we feel better, our mood and mindset is better outside, it's because of the space, right? Yeah, it's the sun, it's the breeze, but this space that has all of these properties that the brain loves and wants to be comfortable in, and the brain can assess speed much better when it has this real natural space that's going on. That's what we need to be talking about, and it is teachable, and it's not simple. And the reason why I call it the invisible part of the game, most coaches and teachers kind of get frustrated. Now, let me just get back to what I teach best, right? Let me just continue to hammer away on the mechanical part of the game. And I did that for years, right? The amount of children that I maybe could have helped had I understood what I'm talking about now, it saddens me at some point that I fell into mainstream teaching, right? And I did what everybody else was doing. I was getting these drills, and it was the drill of the day, and it was this and that. And I spent too much time talking about the mental part of the game. So now I have all these athletes that were using third-party strategies to try to make them calm, until I ran into and realized that, you know what, we live, train, and play in the visual world. You want to get your players to read better, right? Teach them about the space between words. That's what speed reading is all about. And some of the comments that are coming in about, hey, this is about hunting, right? This is about what shooters do. You're right, right? This information exists. I'm just trying to pull it back in. And yeah, for the college programs that can afford my exorbitant fees, I get to go in there for 2 days and kind of undo a lot of the hitting drills and the pitching drills that are kind of mainstream. And it really begins with teaching the coaches about space and just hammering away. When I look at nothing, I see everything. That the harder you look, the less you'll see. And as simple as that is, I pray that that's the mantra that some of you take from what we're talking about, right? Go and Google open focus, right? Yeah, it's great. I know everybody that's on this call, right? We're going to have some discounted rates. Yeah, I'm really proud of this book. This is my life work. I'm going to say it right now. I always wanted to write a book, but I didn't want to write a book that was just so much, it was same old, right? This, when you talk about the visual and emotional strategies of the best, I've been very lucky to be, worked for 10 Major League Baseball teams. You name it, anybody who's tried to win a college baseball or softball world championship, I worked for them. I'm on the Olympic team. I'll be heading to Tokyo, Japan, hopefully, if COVID doesn't kick our butt out over there. So I've had the opportunity to really ask what the best do. and the best aren't staring at balls. The best pitchers, I work with a lot of major league pitchers, right? Tony, what do you mean you don't want us to stare at the glove? What do you mean you want us to look at this runway in between? And to me, any teaching term that you have, whether you're working with major league players or a 7-year-old, you better dummy it down. You better understand the concept and know your audience, right? And get them to understand what you're trying to do. The master teacher does that, right? And as much as I think the book is great, you need to digest it. You need to look at it and say, if I can't present that concept to the least intelligent person on my team, I'm not going to use that as a teaching tool. Don't be the coach that just simply unloads information over and over again. I think that's probably the best message I could have.
Hey, Tony.
On that note, I know there were a series of questions that are coming up, but we can certainly take one or two verbally if that's appropriate.
Yeah, Carolina said, my husband is the AAA pitcher. He'll be totally in control with his pitches, and then sometimes all of a sudden we'll just throw the ball after ball from back-to-back walks. Any advice for losing control out of nowhere and how to get back on track in that situation?
Without mentioning names, there were two major league pitchers that I worked with last year that, as whether it's runners on base or maybe it's the pitch that your husband doesn't really want to, is least comfortable throwing, it might be a secondary pitch. There's a tendency visually for him to get locked in, right? I'm really going to hit the glove, or I'm really going to try to use one of the knees on the catcher to kind of get locked in on. And as the visual system does that, and this space between the pitcher and the catcher disappear, anxiety level goes up, stress level goes up, because you've taken away from the pitcher, right, what the brain really wants to hunt, and that's the space. And when you do that, tension level goes up, feel of the pitch gets affected also, right? And then all of a sudden, since it's not about being visual, and you got the back of the brain with our friends, self-doubt, worry, and fear kind of taken over. And I think the cool thing about letting the visual system control the body, it shuts the back of the brain, right? As in the thought process that goes on. And we all know that we get in trouble as athletes, right? When that Ken Revisa used to talk about stinking thinking. And Ken and I used to debate all the time. Ken Revisa, I mean, the godfather of sports psychology. I would always kid with him and say, Ken, you know what? I think half of these slumps that you talk about, if we changed how they were paying attention and how they tracked a moving object or stared at a glove, might change the outcome to it a bit. It's like, what comes first? You know, the control issues that are going on and the thought process of, I can't throw a strike. What if you fix that with some of the topics that we're talking about now, right? Your husband, and I have no problem talking to your husband free of charge and just getting him to understand that this runway, this space in between where he's throwing, right? He can practice it in the bullpen, right? I've actually put markers at times between home plate and the pitcher's mound for young pitchers or any pitcher at that point to just realize, you know what? Let me just have, I call them markers, okay? It's like the dog that goes outside and it's kind of marking their space. I'm gonna put some markers out there. We do the same thing with hitting, right? I'm so excited to see one of my college clients, University of Arizona. I'm gonna name drop now, University of Arizona baseball going to the College World Series. Jay Johnson, who wrote the testimonial for my book, right? Constantly talking about runways. And when they take batting practice, he puts these markers right between the pitcher's mound and home plate, just to get his hitters to realize, stop staring at the glove, right? That this runway area that they've heard me talk about, let's remind ourselves, let's keep our eyes and our focus level in the space that's going on. So to me, when working with pitchers, the first thing that you should ask, or your husband would share, how hard he's looking at the end product, right? If he's so external, right? And we know that the catcher and the glove, and I got to throw a strike, which is a real result way of thinking it, right? It's going to affect his ability to pay attention. And because of that, this space that is so comforting and healing to the visual system and calms the back of the brain, that could explain maybe why he doesn't have the command that he does at times.
Awesome, thank you, Tony. And Fritz asks, what advice do you have for a player that has become hesitant and overthinking on a ball hit to them? Do you get to the what do you get to what caused the problem to begin with, and how do you work through getting back to where they started with being aggressive and seeing the ball better, especially on defense?
Well, right, when you talk about defense, right, and again, the visual system is everywhere, right? Defense, hitting, the hitter or the fielder in this situation, well, I don't want the ball being hit to me. There's probably some underlying issues there too, right? Maybe booted a ball, confidence level isn't very, very good. I think also when you talk about infielders, they're pre-pitch actions. I call them the pre-actions. You watch really good infielders or outfielders, they have this mechanical routine before a pitch is thrown. I think we'd all agree with that. They don't just simply stand there. I think when you're trying to help an infielder or an outfielder, hey, I want the ball, right? That's really the mindset of the best defenders that you watch at any level. They pray for the ball to be hit to them. But before that happens, if the back of the brain is saying, don't hit it to me, and again, this gets back to they're probably staring at home plate. They're either probably staring at the barrel of the bat, or here's the other challenge that you see as it relates to defense. Don't have your hitters try to track the ball coming in from the pitcher, right? The pitcher's getting ready to throw, maybe at 10 and under, but once the ball starts going faster, as a visual strategy, which will get them better, they need to get their eyes in front of home plate before the ball gets there. I think about how many young infielders, I see this in college all the time. I'll ask a Division I college outfielder, tell me how you're tracking the ball to home plate, and he's playing center field. Oh, the pitcher gets thrown and I'm watching it come in. How about plan B? How about as soon as the pitcher gets ready to release the ball, or in softball down on the hip, you're going to very slowly get to 5 feet in front of home plate, and you're going to sit there and wait for the ball to come back out. That will give better anticipation skills. And the fact that you're now giving that to that non-confident young infielder, you're giving him something to do now, okay? And I think sometimes when young infielders who struggle, and again, this gets back to stop staring at the batter, stop staring at the glove, having that infielder think more about this space in between. Again, as crazy as it sounds, why do we feel so good about ourselves when we're outside? Because the space that's out there really has this calming effect on our visual system. So to me, yeah, he needs more reps. And I think this is the problem also, right? Don't do cardio hitting and don't hit 1,000 ground balls to your young players, right? You got to give them time in between, right, to readjust these routines. If you're trying to change a visual routine, you can't do it by hitting balls over and over and over and over again. Same thing with hitting, right? We have a generation of kids, I call it cardio hitting, right? Coaches are throwing strikes every single time. If you really want to help hitters, every 3 balls should be out of the strike zone. I know you want them to feel good, but in a typical game, they're not getting these mommy balls, these mistakes over the middle over and over and over again, right? You're not visually challenging them. So give them some time in between. Typically in a game at the college level, you got about 18 to 20 seconds in between a pitch. Let them pull out, or even if they don't get out of the batter's box, let their brains assess the space. Let them look up and down the runway just a little bit, okay, before the next pitch comes in again. So now the eyes are saying, okay, I have my markers. I'm going to spend more time seeing where the ball is going. But if you're constantly just throwing the ball back and forth over and over again, excuse me, it becomes an issue. And hitting coaches that are out there, stop telling them to focus on the release point. It's the same problem that the well-intended pitching coaches are saying. Lock in on the glove, use the target. Because here's the problem: if you overteach to young hitters, watch the ball out of the hand. What's the problem? Yeah, they're really going to watch that hand. And now the ball comes out. And guess where their visual system is still making a priority? The damn hand. So the ball comes out. I'm showing you this way, right? The ball comes out. And since you've overtaught, watch the release point, watch it out of the hand, ball's on its way. Well, we just spent the last 45 minutes talking about the space in front of the ball. You now have that visual system staring at the origin, staring at the source of where the ball's coming from. Now the ball comes out. Okay. They're a split second late, and now they realize it. Now what happens? Now the eyes go into what's called visual chaos. Holy shit. I got to go catch up with the ball. I got to get in front of it. I got to get in front of it. That is the worst way to track a moving object. So be very careful over teaching. Watch the ball out of the hand. Lock in on the release point. Watch the window. All these things that have been mainstreamed over the years that have not that have not worked to the level that we'd like to think. Okay. And I think that, somebody mentioned before about, is this a book for baseball and softball? Chapter 1 is all about the visual piece of it. Then it goes into mood and mindset. I work with more athletes that are not baseball and softball with this visual piece of it. But whether you're a pole vaulter, track and field, anytime that you have to assess space, and anytime you're looking for a much better way to reduce anxiety and have better coping skills, and realize that this zone, this mental performance puzzle is something that could be simpler, right? If you controlled your mood, and I know I talk about this in the book all the time, right? You want to have a good performance, check in with your mood, right? What is my mood right now, right? And how do you very quickly get back into a good mood? And yeah, the book talks about visualization and affirmation and self-talk and letting go, but I present it in a way in which a 12-year-old can understand it in these really simple, easy to read chapters, okay? And I don't use the big words. Big words are cool for parents, right? Our job is to fix college athletes who don't want to read an awful lot. And if there's a lot of big SAT words in it, they're not going to pay attention to it. So yeah, no matter what sport that you're pertaining to, you've got to embrace this visual psychology, interrelationship as to what I'm paying attention to and how I'm feeling. I mentioned before that, I have a law degree. I learned how to speed read at a very early age, and I love teaching young athletes because they don't have a lot of time how to speed read. Speed reading is based on this concept that we're talking about. I look at a sentence, I look at space. Everybody else who reads slow and don't have good reading comprehension are looking at every individual word. So the relevance to this book, yeah, it's certainly about sports, but if you've got an athlete that maybe is struggling in the classroom, confidence and self-esteem is really a function of what? Changing their routine, right? And getting them to understand that, let me just start with how I pay attention, right? The book talks about body language, and when you're talking to people, right? How instead of staring at them, learning this concept of open focus gets them more comfortable, better body language. And I'm hoping that it makes them not only better students if their reading is getting better, but by the time they hit the field, right? They're living in this visual world. They're starting to realize that it's not about the harder I look, the more I'm going to see. They're realizing that you can process so much more information, and the brain will calm down so much more when you're staying in this non-judgmental seeing, that you're going to see more and be less stressed once you realize that this concept of open focus, when I look at nothing, I see everything, that Manny talked about, that now clinical psychologists are talking about it via open focus. That was really the purpose of the book. And yeah, it'd be great to get people not to chase curveballs and for pitchers to throw strikes, but really as teachers, right? This is all about teaching life skills. I mean, as coaches, as educators, right? Not many people are going to make a living at the highest level playing baseball or softball or anything else. We hope that they do, and we never take their dreams away. But you know what, boy, by the time they leave your organization or whatnot, you know what, I've learned how to relax. You've taught them how to visually relax. You've given them new meaning in concentrating, right? We live in a world now where concentrating and working harder and focusing harder is the exact opposite in which the best of the best do. So yeah, the relevance to the topics in this book, I think, pertain way more than the how to hit a change up and things like that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tony. Thank you for your time today. And to all the coaches who hopped on, we really appreciate it. I know it's a busy time for you guys, but thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And Tony, if you want to have some closing remarks about the book and what you plan on emailing them, that'd be great.
I think it's great that on a Monday afternoon, we're all very busy, right? But to me, knowledge is power. I'm hoping that I said one thing, or some of you that were taking notes like Amari, right? I said one thing, one concept, one teaching cue that you can find helpful and you can bring it to the next generation of players, then it was well worth spending time here. Yeah, you can find the book on Amazon. You can find it at TonyAbbatine.com. It's a fun, easy book to read. People ask me, well, is it more for a coach? Is it more for a parent, more for a player? I think after 12 years old, the way in which the book is written, most of the chapters they'll be able to understand. Some of the chapters get into the theory. Some of the coaches that like the clinical stuff behind it can certainly do that. And I know as a follow-up, BSN has been nice enough to do something in the way of a discount or something for the book. So yeah, if anything that I said here was somewhat interesting, we can certainly get access to it. And if you have any questions, even if you don't want to buy the book, I know people have choices, right? Between Twitter, Instagram, at frozenropes.com. If you've got a specific question and I can possibly help, I'd be more than happy to do that too, for those of you that took the time to be guests today for BSN and for me.